I am delighted that this conference is happening. It's about time. Coca is one of the most important medicinal plants in the world. It is also a plant of enormous historical, cultural, scientific, botanical interest, and it has been neglected, not only neglected by the scientific community, but also demonized by European, North American culture. And it's time to really change that. We have denied ourselves the many benefits of this plant while exposing ourselves to the dangers of one element of it, which does not represent the actions of the plant. And the only way this is going to change is with a change in consciousness, and it will happen through the work that you guys are doing. I entered Harvard as a freshman in 1960 and took Dick Schultes' course in plants and human affairs. And he was my thesis advisor. I wrote an undergraduate thesis under him, then went to medical school in 1964. In 1965, after my first year of medical school, Dick Schultes sent me to South America on a plant collecting trip. And just before I left, he said, "I want you to be sure to chew coca when you're down there." Said it's a very interesting plant and you should get to know it. So I did, first in Peru and then in Bolivia, and I was fascinated by it. And so I was there before Tim entered as a student and before Wade entered as a student. And then I was on the research faculty of the Harvard Botanical Museum for many years. And in that position, I conducted studies of coca. I was first interested in learning about the different varieties of coca, but I was always fascinated by the medicinal uses. Among the indigenous population of the Andes, it is the most important medicinal plant. It's holding the position, of something like peppermint or chamomile in European traditional medicine. And listen to what these people had to say about all of the wonderful effects of coca. And then I was astonished that there was so little modern research on it. For a plant that is of such enormous historical, cultural, scientific, medicinal, botanical importance, it has been so little studied and little paid attention to. And that struck me as strange. And then the whole governmental policy issue, which Wade and I have been quite involved with, is I think that one of the most striking examples of how we have gone wrong in our relationships with plant medicines. When I went to live with the Cubeos, this was in the 1970s, there had been very little written about the use of Amazonian coca. Most of the observations were made in the Andes, and there was a conflation of the living conditions of the Andes and all of the social problems there, malnutrition, harsh climate, and so forth, with effects of coca. And it was very interesting to see in the Amazonian population, where people were well fed and didn't have those climatic challenges, that you didn't see any of that social pathology associated with the leaf. That was the first observation I made. And then a major focus of my work in integrative medicine is to teach both health practitioners and patients about the differences between complex natural products and compounds isolated from them and made available in purified form. And I think there are many advantages to using complex natural drugs. I don't reject the medications we have. I think they have their place, but often these complex mixtures of compounds are safer and have better effects than isolated compounds. And coca and cocaine are one of the most dramatic examples of that. You've said, many people said coca is not cocaine, but this is a really, really important point. I think, first of all, education, all important, and it's teaching people the difference between cocaine and coca. Secondly, to make people aware of these benefits, and then to create a demand for whole coca products in North America, because I think that would open a market demand that would drive change. The producing companies would love to be able to export coca legally and make it available. But and also it's a matter of educating physicians about these uses, because most doctors have no awareness at all about coca or its potential benefits. I think if we could get a demand going here, a market demand, and then an educated medical profession, that would begin to change things. It's a Schedule II substance, which should theoretically make it much easier to work with than a Schedule I substance. It means it's technically available for medical use. Now, it is absolutely it's unthinkable that researchers can't get supplies of coca to work with. But as you know, one of the main people trying to study the leaf at the University of Florida, I think has tried now for over a year to get supplies of coca legally and has not been able to because of bureaucratic red tape. That has got to change, possibly with the new administration we have coming in. When I first went to Peru in 1965, I worked with the Empresa Nacional de la Coca. They took me around to the coca fields and so forth. It was so obvious to me that Peru was two nations that have always been at war with each other since the Spanish conquest. There is the indigenous population with its capital in the high altitude that uses coca as its main, recreational stimulant, and there's the European population based in Lima that drinks alcohol. And these have been at war with each other ever since. At one point, the Peruvian government had the World Health Organization come in and administer Stanford Binet and Wechsler intelligence scales to Andean Indians and concluded that coca caused mental deterioration in that population. And therefore, it should be eradicated because it was holding back national development. And it's that mentality, I think, that we're up against, that these two civilizations clashing with each other that look at the world in very different ways. The other thing that I observed that I pointed out in that 1981 paper is that coca appears to have an extraordinary effect on metabolism, on carbohydrate metabolism. The Andean population has a very high incidence of the genes for type 2 diabetes, but they don't express themselves in that population if people are consuming coca along with their high carbohydrate diet and getting a lot of physical exercise. If those people move to lower altitude, stop using coca, and begin eating more, of typical city diets, those genes express themselves. So I think there's tremendous potential for looking at coca as a potential treatment for or preventive of type 2 diabetes, which is an enormous problem in our population. I think that we have not really pursued that argument of this being a sacred plant and how we have, really not only failed to recognize that, but have completely devalued and opposed that. And at this time, when there's so much consciousness about indigenous rights, I think this would be very timely to emphasize.